So, at the end of 2024, when I looked back on Frozen and whether it held up 10 years later, I mentioned that at the time of its release I had little to no knowledge of the musical Wicked, which it was widely accused of attempting to emulate, what with casting Idina Menzel in the role of another misunderstood sorceress who gets a big, empowering song after fleeing respectable society. And at the time I made that video, Wicked had a long-awaited film adaptation in cinemas that I had yet to see, and unfortunately didn't get the chance to on the big screen, but now I have not only seen it 4 times and loved it even more on each rewatch, I saw its second part, for good, twice in 1 week amid YouTube firing recommendations about it being terrible at me left, right and centre. Not just not as fun as the first, or flawed but still good, but declaring it a total failure, John M. Chu to be an incompetent director, and all sorts of baffling takes that have me convinced we've entered a second wave of that exhausting late 2000s bad faith, nitpicky, complainy internet criticism that I'm starting to call plot hole culture. And I'm sorry, but some of us had to live through the dark days of the 2016-2017 period where people were unfairly slating the Power Rangers reboot as somehow being bad actually, while insisting that f***ing Suicide Squad was a masterpiece, and I just didn't get the style they were going for. If Wicked for Good is what's considered a bad film nowadays, okay, people are allowed to have their opinions, sure. And my channel has become something of a beacon for defending movies condemned in the court of public opinion, so why wait 20 years to do so? I'm not going to waste anyone's time with an info dump on where Wicked originates from, considering it's a prequel to one of those movies that even the strange mole-like creatures living in the centre of the earth have probably seen, and I am not a long-time fan of the stage musical or the books it is loosely adapted from, though I do stand the original by L. Frank Baum, and I consider The Wizard of Oz one of the greatest movies ever made. And actually, because of that, I've always had a complicated relationship with Wicked. Sure, I loved YouTubing clips of Idina belting out Defying Gravity, and the premise seemed interesting, but I'm very much a classical fairy tale purist, and I quickly grew very tired of all the attempts at deconstruction and revisionism that Disney in particular still haven't let up on. With Maleficent being a low point for me, since Sleeping Beauty is my favourite Disney movie, and now having seen Wicked and what it does right, it's honestly Maleficent that's far more deserving of a bollocking for ripping it off than Frozen, which still has plenty of good points. And before I finally saw Wicked, I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder regarding how it is responsible for this wave of, no, the villain of the story was just misunderstood. My reaction to the film being announced was mild curiosity rather than hype or fury, especially since the circus of online controversies seemed to spell that we were in for a disaster. But skipping ahead to the present day, a new fan was created through the 2-part adaptation, and I'm ready to go all in on the defense. Something first has to be said about knowing how to properly do an adaptation and not just a filmed version of the same thing you see on stage. I remember a couple of years ago when Tick Tick Boom was doing the rounds and Catherine Steele praised it for really using the medium of film to make it stand on its own and create an experience that you can only get from watching the movie, which I agree with 100%. That movie was great. Go watch it.
I thought by now I'd have a dog, a kid, and wife. The ship is sort of sinking.
And both Wicked entries are the same. First, because we have the story split into 2 parts, things get room to breathe, and there are scenes that flow faster on the stage because you're already primed for a bit of suspension of disbelief that things happen in between the scene breaks, but you need to pace more in film, and a big one is the climax of the first part. On stage, you just fade out and then Glinda and Elphaba are locking themselves in the attic. Now there's a whole chase sequence building up Defying Gravity, which now also has a lot of start-stop since it doesn't just close the first act and has to serve as the movie's ending. And that was the one song I knew in and out before watching the movie, and I think that was a good choice, because the final 10 minutes of part 1 bring the chills every damn time. And Elphaba causing a blackout with her powers? Chef's kiss. And in For Good, people seem to have gotten hiatus brain and decided in the year between movies what the second part would be, and confused themselves when it wasn't what they'd assumed.
I swear it never ends with that girl.
Like, there are so many people who assumed that we'd also be seeing the plot of The Wizard of Oz play out again, when not only is that not how Act 2 of the play goes, but they outright stated that Dorothy wouldn't play a big role because there was no way anyone could live up to Judy Garland. It's also important to remember that there's a fine line that has to be walked when it comes to copyright. Although the original book is public domain, the Wicked Witch of the West doesn't have a big role, only coming into the plot when the wizard asks for her to be killed. and her expanded role as the main villain of the story is exclusive to the MGM film, which is copyrighted, so showing movie-exclusive scenes from the Wicked perspective is its own can of worms. And even then, while it's technically a prequel, Wicked isn't supposed to match up 100% with The Wizard of Oz. As for one, Glinda isn't blonde, she's played by a woman in her 50s and displays actual feats of magic. Plus, she's already gone by the time Dorothy walks the yellow brick road. Now, supposedly there's a good half-hour worth of deleted scenes and the studio wanted a shorter runtime than part 1, but I think the pacing is mostly fine. No good deed ends with a fade to black, which in film language is code for time skip. Clearly some time has passed to allow Dorothy to find all her companions, and the rest of the movie unfolds in enough time to allow for the remainder of the story to happen. I hate to play the back in my day card, but seriously, we used to be able to infer things without having our hands held throughout the whole story for us, and we only saw what we needed to and used our imaginations. But hey, plot hole culture is back and running rampant. From the sounds of it, For Good did a very good job at translating the tricky Act 2 of the play into its own film, and honestly, I think it's my preferred entry of the two-parter, though they're both equally good in their own ways. So that's the adaptation covered. Let's get on to the direction. I don't normally devote entire sections to the directors, but I felt it was warranted in this case. And it was through rewatching Crazy Rich Asians for the umpteenth time that made me appreciate that I am just loving the phase John M. Chu's career is currently going through. I mean, 10 years ago he was at a low point, helming a reboot of Gem and the Holograms that he had spent a decade developing, and wanted to make nice and faithful to the cartoon. But Scooter Braun and Jason Blum pretty much forced it to be turned into a generic teen drama that had little to do with the original, and of course he took the fall and got countless death threats for how it turned out. But even within that, in certain scenes like the performance of Youngblood, you can feel his unique voice coming through, and with the costumes and makeup as well, so that if they ever try to reboot it, he's the one who should get the gig to right this wrong. And then with films like Crazy Rich Asians and In the Heights, we see how he works within a larger scale and experiments with spectacle. Like, I was shocked to find that Crazy Rich Asians was a mid-budget film of $30 million, because it looks like it costs 3 times that, in a good way. The visual flair of this movie is so underrated, and then In the Heights was a good attempt to make a musical movie, and not just a stage one with cameras. The 96,000 sequence is peak, using the medium of film to its utmost advantage. I definitely see these movies as test runs before he went all out on the Wicked two-parter, and it feels so strange to see them be attacked for things like their lighting, colour grading, or anything. Like, I get it. I prefer the film look too, and there are plenty of modern movies that look either dull or washed out thanks to how digital tends to give you a very flat, greyish look when it's raw, and there were a couple of shots in the Part 1 trailer that made me go, okay, that's looking a little washed out, but in the film itself, a lot of modern movies can look flat because they're shot mainly in front of a green screen with the intent to fix everything in post just in case a producer, exec, or even the director decides they want to change the background, and the lighting has to be kept neutral for the sake of chroma key. But Wicked was the outlier in that John M. Chu was insistent on using practical sets. Like 9 million tulips were planted on the Munchkinland soundstage, they built an actual rotating bookshelf for dancing through life, and a working train was constructed for this bit. And while I do love to defend Oz the Great and Powerful, that movie's over-reliance on CGI gets more obvious as the years go by, whereas practical sets are timeless. In contrast to a lot of the Disney live-action remakes that can feel constrained and more like a theme park, here you get a real sense of scale and spectacle. I mean, the One Short Day sequence? Do I even need to say anything? I could just show the frames to make my point. And why is Wicked getting attacked for having little to no colour? Okay, the Shiz campus is a little on the bright side, but the look there is more sun-kissed than washed out. And the entirety of The Wizard and I is practically a tour showing off all the set and its details, and I see plenty of colour on display. Look at the purple-tinted sunset as Fiyero rides to Shiz, the blue lights in the Ozdust ballroom, the pink dominating the hallway towards the end of Popular. Even Nessa's shoes jump out at you whenever they're on screen. And I went into For Good with an open mind, but I didn't see any issues with colour there either, and the film looked stunning on the big screen. The neon flashes in Wonderful, this shot of Elphaba flying over the Ribbon Lakes, hell, the yellow brick road pops out every time it's there. And in sequences like No Good Deed that look a little hazy, that's clearly a stylistic choice. There are plenty of modern movies you could accuse of looking dull or overly green-screened, but neither of these are among them. John M. Chu knew what he wanted visually, and it was spectacular. Another lesser-sung skill of his is his ability to work with actors. Like, I became a huge fan of Gemma Chan via Crazy Rich Asians, and having seen multiple other roles since then, it seems like a lot of directors don't know what to do with her, or how to play to her strengths. But she is at her best in Crazy Rich Asians, where she can bring that movie star charisma necessary to be a larger-than-life figure like Astrid, but also invite you in, so that a super wealthy goddess like this can be the most relatable and sympathetic character in the ensemble. And even her glamour shots make her feel like a modern-day Garbo-esque deity, which I think is the skill that led to Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo seeming so larger than life in the Wicked movies. And in his musical adaptations, he has also shown that he can help actors take a role famous for being played by somebody else and make it their own. Like, Catherine Steele again pointed out that Usnavi of In the Heights is a role so heavily associated with Lin-Manuel Miranda that he considered reprising it in the film, even though he'd aged out of it. But Anthony Ramos was able to make the cinematic Usnavi stand alongside the stage one, and I can't unsee him as that character now.
I'm a street light choking on the heat. The world spins around while I'm frozen to my seat.
And of course, any Elphaba and Glinda were always going to be in the shadow of Idina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth, and double in the case of the latter since Glinda was written for her, and so tailored to her style that Ariana Grande was the one I was most apprehensive of, but we'll get to that. I'll ease us in slowly. Now, one of the most interesting Oz characters in terms of how people interpret her is the Wicked Witch of the East. You know, the other tyrant who's dead before the plot starts. The 1939 film represents her entirely as a pair of feet sticking out from under a house, and the original book only sheds a little more light on what she was like as a person, and that light tells us bad with a capital B. And yet, because the idea of a second Wicked Witch is too good to pass up, adaptations and retellings love throwing her in there, with my favourite interpretation being Oz the Great and Powerful, where she was the advisor to the previous ruler of the Emerald City and killed him to seize power, then framing Glinda for it and corrupting her sister into siding with her, and Rachel Weisz is clearly having a lot of fun in the role.
What's the matter, Glinda? Out of bubbles?
Wicked's interpretation really intrigued me after seeing both films, and I was also baffled at a bunch of hot takes saying her arc made no sense. So, okay, the Wicked Witch of the East is represented here as Nessa Rose, or just Nessa for short. The Gamora to Elphaba's Nebula, ironic, yes, with their father as Thanos. Doted on and pampered both because of her disability and, my interpretation, because Governor Throp likely suspected that Elphaba wasn't biologically his. Even though Nessa is nicer to her sister than him, she also doesn't have her back the way Elphaba does hers, such as blaming Elphaba for making a scene and ruining her chance at a fresh start when Elphaba was trying to intervene to help her, and never apologising once Madame Morrible helps her save face. And when Glinda has Bok ask her out, Nessa outright dismisses the way Elphaba has been bullied, however playfully, by Glinda, and refuses to hear a word against her.
Don't you dare say another word against her.
Then when it seems like her sister is set up to be humiliated at the Ozdust, does Nessa intervene?
I can't watch.
No dear, you don't have to watch if you know you and your date step in to help since that is your sister. And it's this that's foreshadowing for her arc in For Good, where now as the governor of Munchkinland after her father's death, she's being pressured to pass anti-animal laws, and despite Bok trying to convince her not to, she goes,
I don't. People will say she's just like her sister.
Show of hands. Who else has had that variety of toxic friend who justifies doing terrible things with, I had to? And internally you're like, no dear, you chose to. And now, without her father to fuss and pamper her, and Elphaba is out of the picture, preventing her from having someone to feel superior to, she doesn't know how to cope with not being loved, and her evolution into tyrant is complete. Since it starts with passing one oppressive law with, oh, I had no choice, then progresses to passing another with the air of a spoiled little girl going, Daddy, want. And finally, it's trying to use magic to force the object of her obsession to be hers forever, even when she knows he's hung up on another girl. And despite a moment of self-awareness, she throws her sister under the bus and doesn't take responsibility for her own actions, with the result that she dies alone, and Dorothy is celebrated for killing her. Would I have liked more screen time? Yeah, of course, but I'm happy with what we got.
The Wicked Witch of the East!
Marissa Bodie's performance really sells it. Not just her beautiful singing, which I re-listen to over and over again sometimes, but she has a way of making Nessa feel so complicated. even when she's morphing into a villain. Like, the way her face lights up when she's happy, you can instantly buy why people like Bock and Elphaba would overlook her more toxic traits and be like, let the girl have her happy. And even when the house is coming down on her, despite everything she's done, you still feel sorry for her and everything she's experienced. I was honestly hoping a Best Supporting Actress nomination would be in her future, but alas.
Fly around Oz with that book helping animals you've never even met, and not once have you ever thought to use your powers to help me.
You never wanted my help.
I do now!
It also feels like the significance of her casting has been kind of glossed over. The musical has been around since 2003, and she's the first wheelchair user to play the role, along with Cecily Collette Taylor, who plays Nessa as a child. The script also underwent a few rewrites to be a bit more respectful, such as Elphaba no longer being Nessa's carer at Shiz, portraying people who try to push her chair for her as in the wrong, and the biggest difference in For Good, where rather than her begging Elphaba to enchant the shoes to make her walk, the spell is to make her feel as she did back at the Ozdust, with flying being a side effect of that. Disability access in the arts still needs a lot of work, and it doesn't affect me too much since my disability is invisible, but it's been getting better over the years, particularly in the Marvel branch of film and TV, so anything that contributes to that in a big way deserves all the praise. And hopefully being in 2 big films back to back will give Marissa Bodie a boost because she demonstrated that she deserves all the big roles. With a voice like that, she needs to be a Disney princess.
And I only wish there were something I could do for her.
Now for the object of her obsession. After seeing both films, Bock was the character I came away most fascinated with. I could guess the twist with Fiyero in part 1 because they weren't exactly subtle with the foreshadowing.
Get stuffed.
And I did have Bock's fate spoiled for me somewhat, so I went into For Good intrigued to see how it would play out. Since the Tin Man is probably tied with the Scarecrow in terms of my favourites from the original, my expectations were met in a good way.
What have you done to me?
From what I understand, the movie adaptation softens his character from the play, where he can come across as a creepy stalker who hangs around Glinda and leads Nessa on just to get into her good books, and while that story still unfolds in the movie, the impression I came away with is that he got the message when he saw Glinda kissing Fiyero, and so he was actually attempting to move on, and at least try a relationship with Nessa, because Ethan Slater makes several choices that indicate he certainly likes her as a person. Like when he asks her to dance, he offers her his hands rather than pushing her chair without her consent as Miss Coddle had done, and when it starts raining he takes off his jacket to stop her from getting wet. And the way he plays these deleted scenes. There's another one where he outright tells Elphaba he doesn't want to hurt Nessa.
I don't want to hurt her.
Well, you're gonna end up hurting her anyway.
Which seems to have been triggered by meeting Governor Throp and realizing she is way more into him than he thought. Nessa also isn't exactly in the dark herself. She sees him merely looking at Glinda and storms off. And before either of them could communicate, her father dies of a heart attack that very night, with the implication in For Good being that Bock tried to be there for her in the year she was grieving. And he's finally honest when she starts passing oppressive laws, but tries to reassure her they'll still be friends, and what does she do?
All Munchkins are forbidden to leave Munchkinland without express written permission of the governor.
There is a difference between withholding the truth to control someone's reaction, and doing so because you fear for your life and safety if you displease them. As, after all, the just be honest argument requires the other person to accept the honesty in a non-toxic way. By all means get angry and hold them to task for the choices they made and how long it took, but don't do, this. Not saying I agree with Bock's choices, but I understand them, and Nessa's too, actually, which is what makes the story so rich, especially with 2 films to let it breathe. The bit where you finally see him turn into the Tin Man, all the chills.
What have you done?
And that's not even getting into his solo in March of the Witch Hunters. Ethan Slater is another one I expected to get a Best Supporting Actor nod, but oh well.
I have a personal score to settle with the witch!
The only thing with Bock is that I wish there had been a scene properly resolving his story. While I know that it's clearly not meant to be an exact match with the 1939 film or the original book, as a fan of the character, I'd like some nod to how this guy
I'll be heartless killing her!
becomes this guy.
Now I know I've got a heart, because it's breaking.
And yeah, that's a flaw in the source material more than anything else, but maybe a little scene between him and Glinda at the end to give some closure. There's headcanon that Dorothy was in on the plan to fake Elphaba's death, and that Fiyero explained everything to her, with Bock possibly being in on it too, so that's the interpretation I'll go with. Oh, movie, you were so good you got me mental fanficking. But speaking of Fiyero, midway through last year, after watching part 1 for the 3rd time, I tweeted that it probably says a lot about me that Fiyero of all people is my favourite character in this. And I understand he's rather divisive to fans of the original for totally nuanced and justifiable reasons. Who are we kidding? He gets in the way of the most popular ship, and as the Supernatural fandom demonstrates, that doesn't prompt good reactions. But in all seriousness, there are complaints that stage Fiyero can come across as a shallow frat bro until Act 2 when he starts revealing his hidden depths, something that is fixed in the movie, or at least that's what I'm assuming, because I was on board with this romance from their very first scene together.
I'm not seasick.
Neither am I.
No, I did not eat grass as a child.
Oh, you didn't? I did.
These kinds of love interests can be a hard sell because a lot of the time they play up the slap slap kiss kiss and make the guy too mean or toxic, so the only apparent reason they fall in love is because the plot says so. Or else they fall into the opposite trap of turning the guy into what Liana has dubbed Captain Keylight. Basically, a bland dream boy there to be unrealistically devoted to the girl's toxicity because, of course, being supportive means unflinching compliance and never questioning her actions. Fiyero, by contrast, is firstly a good person, with them having his introduction scene being riding in the woods with his horse, who he treats as a friend, thus signalling that he'll be pro-animal rights like Elphaba, and laying a foundation for an attraction based on shared core values. And secondly, he has a personality.
I have always been green.
And the defensiveness, is that a recent development?
With him playfully checking Elphaba on how she pushes people away to avoid getting close to anyone, and she in turn meets him where he is and challenges him on his facade, showing that she's interested in the person he really is, as opposed to the image he projects for the sake of popularity. And Jonathan Bailey sells the fuck out of it.
I'll make you happy too, right?
You know me, I'm always happy.
I'd never seen him in anything before this, as I am not the audience for Bridgerton, but hello, favourite character.
There is no pretense here. I happen to be genuinely self-absorbed and deeply shallow.
Three-dimensional in his portrayal, with every decision he makes avoiding feeling like the fanfiction or wish fulfillment it could be, and coming across as the most obvious choice. And his arc is super compelling. One of his most underrated performances is in For Good, when he pulls a gun on Glinda, and it then turns into this almost apology tango where you can tell that this guy is so sorry that finally doing the right thing has hurt her this much, even though he was forced into a shotgun wedding while she tried to ignore their home turning into a dystopia.
Glinda, I am so sorry.
And he and Cynthia Erivo have the most red-hot chemistry that if I didn't know he was gay and with someone else, you'd think they were consummating like bunnies behind the scenes. While people were weirdly fixated on this grey cardigan during As Long As You're Mine, I was appreciating the chemistry and the quality of the performance. And while it's fun to joke that Glinda and Elphaba are such good friends, or like sisters with a nudge wink, this version makes Elphaba Fiyero absolute endgame in terms of what best serves the story. And taken as a backstory for an already beloved character, even if the movie is obviously its own continuity and not meant to be taken as a direct prequel, this feels like a great addition rather than a corruption. Hint hint, Maleficent movie. People complain that we don't get enough of a reaction to him being turned into the Scarecrow, except we do.
You saved my life.
What more do you want? There's even complaints that the Scarecrow makeup made him look too human, when here's Ray Bolger's makeup in the original film. I can't even with some of these weird complaints. Anyway, I'm not sure if Jonathan Bailey would qualify for Best Actor, or if Fiyero is more of a supporting role, but I guess the Academy solved that problem for us in the same way Thanos solved overpopulation. But back to positivity. Jonathan Bailey, absolutely definitive in the role of Fiyero, and gives me hope that modern filmmakers can do a Prince Charming archetype. Is this going to be a thing that by the middle of each decade we get one token good Prince character in fantasy films? Moving on. I'm going to rein myself in and not devote sections to umpteen supporting characters, but I suppose the first one to talk about is Madame Morrible.
I'm a sorceress, not a mind reader.
Now supposedly they wanted to prop up the twist that she's actually the wizard's right-hand villain, which you can see coming a mile away in the play, and of course in the medium of theatre you need to consolidate your cast so as not to have too many spear carriers on the stage. But in a film where they don't need to be going through the entire performance every night, and you need more world building and can't leave as much to the imagination, she's split into two characters. Now we have Miss Coddle to play the overbearing headmistress who condescends to Nessa and has Dr. Dillerman removed from class. Great English accent by Keela Settle, by the way.
Not a fret! Just a slight Gulch.
And then Madame Morrible comes across as this tough but fair Minerva McGonagall mentor to Elphaba, who helps her save face by taking the fall for her magic outburst.
Yes, that was me.
And with her being played by Michelle Yeoh, whose branding in Hollywood films is of a mentor to troubled young women, you're not immediately twigging this character as the villain. At least I wasn't. Some people take issue with her not being a singer, but I don't care. I love her in this part. She plays villains very well, and I enjoy seeing her go mask off in for good.
Just do what you do best. Smile. Wave. And shut up.
I personally wouldn't replace her. And let's not forget that Asian actors as well as older women are still underrepresented in film, so anything that combats that is a good thing in my book. Another non-singer who was controversial but still the right choice in my opinion is Jeff Goldblum.
Okay, away with the moon.
Now, I'm not an 80s baby. I've never gotten Jeff Goldblum. Now, however...
Not my best pupil.
I get it. I finally understand the appeal. Again, like Michelle Yeoh, his branding is quirky yet lovable eccentric, with the result that his initial scenes with Elphaba have this warmth that when you know what's coming, it's almost painful to anticipate the reveal, because he comes across as genuinely charming and likeable. Bait the audience with a good guy actor to make the heel turn hurt all the more. It's an old trick, but usually always effective. Even him being a weaker singer just adds to the fact that he's a powerless nobody who somehow failed upwards. And they rewrite the song Wonderful so that Glinda now joins him for it to cover for that. From what I gather, the wizard in the play is mostly out of focus and only gets 3 scenes, with even the reveal that he was Elphaba's father being kind of glossed over. Well, wasted opportunity doesn't describe my reaction to watching this. The opportunities felt well explored, if that's even a coherent sentence. I wouldn't call for him to get a Best Supporting Actor nod, but his reaction to finding out Elphaba was his daughter? No notes at all. But speaking of Glinda... Okay, I was among many people who reacted with huh when I heard that Ariana Grande would be playing Glinda, and I say this as someone who, while not being a huge fan of her music, I stand thank you next. And I even tensed up when I heard that she was rumoured to play Ariel in the Little Mermaid remake. But, well, I did just do a video showing that people were up in arms about Liv Tyler being cast as Arwen in Lord of the Rings, so this is proof that it's always best to see the film before you complain about the casting.
Your name?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes.
And she was on Broadway when she was 14, so that's on us for not remembering. Or you might say that the lead-up taught us patience, Part 1 taught us love, and For Good taught us pain. Anyway, she had been keeping an eye on the role for years, and training non-stop in the hopes of doing it, with there even being a running gag in the casting department that at every audition they'd see a car circling the parking lot outside, and it would be Ariana a half hour early.
I love helping others.
Supposedly it was neck and neck between her and Amanda Seyfried, and, well, she got to be Cosette, so it's fine. Well, better than fine. I honestly don't know if I can fill a whole section on her because this is such a complete performance. It's like a checklist of everything you could possibly display. Comic timing, high soprano notes, just the right amount of camp, knowing when to be serious, knowing when to command the room, and also when to let the other performer take the lead.
I'll say this much. She doesn't give a twig what anyone thinks.
Of course she does. She just pretends not to.
She can go big in the way that musical theatre requires, but also go small in the way you need to for musical film.
But because I knew you.
And while I love her work in Part 1, it's in For Good that she really shines as she completes Glinda's arc. Like, look at this single take close-up on her after the wedding. She doesn't overdo anything. No see the wheels turning. She is living it. It might sound funny to say about a story that's so high concept and calls for a lot of camp, but she turns in a great stoic performance, where you can both get that she's holding everything in, and see every emotion she's not displaying. Don't we love an acting paradox? This shot after Dorothy has left and she's trying to mourn Nessa with dignity.
Goodbye, Nessa.
And then this one after March of the Witch Hunters where she's trying to keep it together. People called this performance cartoony. Media literacy in the negatives. As for the girl in the bubble, well, would you believe that Kristen Chenoweth had asked for a solo like this for Glinda in the second act, and so they found a way to fit it in here. and I'm with people calling for this to be included in future versions of the play as well. I was surprised to learn that this was a new song created for the film because it feels like the story would be incomplete without it. Okay, Glinda is horrified by what's gone down in March of the Witch Hunters, but going straight from that to being brave enough to turn against Morrible and the Wizard? I don't know. This moment of reflection helps bridge that gap. And of course, Ariana Grande sings it beautifully. It's not only baffling that this year she goes completely snubbed at the Oscars, but last year when she was recognised, it was in the supporting category. Like, this is a lead performance. It should have been an All About Eve situation where she and Cynthia Erivo were both nominated in Best Actress. Both years! I'm not saying Cynthia should have won last year so Ariana could win this year, but oh well, moving on. Now, I knew very little of Cynthia Erivo beforehand, although I enjoyed Widows, but even I could feel the pressure on her behalf, considering Elphaba is still in Idina Menzel's shadow when she hasn't played the role for 20 years. And she sadly had to endure the type of online shite that's unfortunately become a given for any non-white actress who gets cast in a major role, including people just branding her a narcissist for clapping back at online racism. But I don't see how anyone could come away from seeing even 5 minutes of one of the Wicked movies and call her a narcissist. I mean actual clinical narcissist, and not just using the word as shorthand for person who displeased me. This is a very generous performance on the part of Cynthia Erivo, because for so many of the scenes in part 1, she has to play the straight man and set up the joke so that Ariana Grande can deliver it.
And you can call me Glinda.
That is your name.
Let's not quarrel.
These two work together to elevate each other's performances. And it's hard for me to describe Cynthia Erivo's work in both films without sounding like the president of her fan club, but come on. Seriously, this is legit one of the greatest performances of all time. If you wanted to rank all the best performances in movie musicals and place her at number 1, I wouldn't fight you. And this is a great film performance that uses the medium to create an experience different from one you'd get watching this on the stage. Paraphrasing someone who has seen the two versions religiously, I'm Not That Girl tends to be played bigger on the stage, with more obvious anguish from Elphaba. But here, Cynthia Erivo brings a stillness to it, where the same message is conveyed, just in a different way. And the scene at the Ozdust goes from cutely comedic to the mode that gives all of us teenage introverts trauma flashbacks, and it never fails to get the waterworks going. Without doing any big expressions or gestures, you're instantly getting, oh god, I trusted this girl, and am I being set up? Maybe if I try to act like I don't care. And she is telling an entire story with her eyes. This isn't acting related, but this movie knows how to use silence. I mentioned back when talking about Simon Merrill's as Marcus Crassus that you can spot the difference between an actor trying to be intense to show they can act and simply embodying an intense person with the performance flowing out of them. Cynthia Erivo belongs to that same school. Her performance seems to come so effortlessly out of her.
You're the only friend I ever had.
And yep, okay, there are belt songs as well, and she more than delivers. Defying Gravity was of course fantastic, and no notes at all, but the one that really hit me was No Good Deed, which, oh lord, is that the mood sometimes or what? Supposedly this was all sung live on set, and if that's true, I have no idea how they did it. She wants to play Storm in the inevitable X-Men reboot, and all I can say is, yes, get one goddess to play another. Another very weird complaint I saw popping up a lot that's also very telling is about how Elphaba wasn't sad enough about her sister dying. You know, this sister.
He might at least pretend to be sorry.
For what? He hated me.
That's a wicked thing to say.
No, it's not. It's just the truth.
Seems like an appropriate level of grieving for a sibling who dismissed the abuse you suffered from the parent who favoured them over you, and was so self-absorbed she turned her home into a dictatorship all over a boy. Sometimes when I hear these crazies, it's like, tell me you lack empathy without telling me. And it's one of the reasons people who obsess over blood connection low-key freak me out.
Nessa, I have done everything I could for you, and it hasn't been enough. Nothing ever will be.
I've had someone who knows better point out to me that Wicked gets it spot on what it's like to be a woman who actually wants to change things, where you basically end up demonized and dismissed because the prettier conformists tend to be listened to easier. But that's probably its own topic, and we've been here long enough. So once For Good had been out for a month, and this narrative formed of it being the inferior film and a weak conclusion, I suspected that this bad buzz would taint its awards consideration, but even I didn't think it would go completely ignored. And yeah, this is more of a blockbuster, and the Oscars these days seem to be more about shedding light on lesser sung films, but even if that's the way it is, I don't have to like it. And all of a sudden, it feels like both movies' wins and successes are getting glossed over or swept under the rug. Both of them together grossed $1.2 billion worldwide, and even just taking Part 1 into account, it is the highest grossing movie musical of all time, and it set records for the amount of home media sales as well. Not to mention that among the Oscars it did win was for the costume design, making Paul Tazewell the first African-American man to win that award. And of course I have to bring the MCU into this and point out that even though Endgame was objectively the weaker film compared to Infinity War, we still saw the conclusion as a celebration rather than all these hot takes trying to paint it as a flop. Now we not only get attempts to claim Wicked was an artistic failure, but that John M. Chu was somehow greedy for splitting it into 2 films and he's being punished for hubris. Apparently choosing artistic integrity is greed. Never mind that a 2-part musical film had never been done before, and the same year Part 1 was released, the trailer for the Mean Girls musical tried to hide that it was a musical supposedly to draw in more audiences, so this was a gamble more than anything else. But this is nothing new for John M. Chu, since the success of Crazy Rich Asians was heavily downplayed, and it got completely snubbed at the Oscars too, and In the Heights got 0 recognition in spite of its 94% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Even Wicked for Good set a record for being the best first-day ticket pre-seller of 2025 on Fandango, beating out Taylor Swift and Superman. And yet everyone is inventing new reasons for why this 2-part adaptation was anything but a success. But ironically, considering what it's a prequel to, that is rather on brand.
We must be over the rainbow.
The Wizard of Oz may be remembered as this big game changer, but its box office gross was fine. It actually lost MGM $1 million because of how behind-the-scenes issues bloated the budget, and it only got a couple of Oscar nominations, just winning for the score and Over the Rainbow. Judy Garland didn't even get a Best Actress nomination and was only awarded a special juvenile Oscar, and even that was more recognition for all of her work that year.
And I'm not going to leave here ever again, because I love you all.
Critics were also mixed on it too, comparing it to the recent Snow White and how the latter was the superior film, which is super ironic considering what was released in between both Wicked entries. It wasn't until the 50s, when The Wizard of Oz started being shown on TV regularly, that it started to really become the classic we remember it as nowadays. And so I do have to stop and remind myself to not place too much stock in the hot takes or box office gross, because sometimes it does take time for the dust to settle, especially once there's no longer an incentive for people to make money off rushing to the internet to bash something. As after all, what have we as audiences been clamouring for the past 4 years? Movies with interesting art direction shot on practical sets as opposed to green screen to oblivion? Complex and well-rounded female characters outside the narrow girl boss, warrior or role model boxes? And equally strong male characters who aren't nerfed to make the women look better by comparison? Sincerity in the storytelling without Whedon-esque dialogue or lampshading to avoid accusations of being cringe? Thoughtful social commentary that's cleverly interwoven with the themes of the story rather than being announced heavy-handedly to get social media clout? Something that doesn't feel like everything else in cinemas? Both Wicked films supply all that and more. And in a few years, when the industry has hopefully course-corrected in the right direction, I like to think that they'll get their credit for being among the first to try. And I have to put my money where my mouth is and also open myself up to accusations of greed and hubris, because not only do I have a fantasy book, Joanna and the 12 Crowns on Amazon, with an audiobook to hopefully follow soon, I also have the sequel on the way, Imani and the Lost City, and it's honestly one of my favourite things I've ever written. More news, hopefully, very, very soon.